All right, so as discussed, I'd like to start today with something we were discussing the other day by way of some career endeavors. So what I did was, obviously it's not a real module, I just wanted a place to put it for you and for you to access it if you saw fit, right? So I think in the next couple weeks, as we start closing out the fall 2023 for all things Homeland Security and counterterrorism, I think once a week for maybe, I don't like to relegate things to time frames, but at least 15, 20 minutes a week to, at the minimum, for your benefit, the identification of at least one agency at the local, county, state, or federal level that is indeed hiring. Does that make sense? Right? And at the very least, even if you're not interested in that particular agency or that vertical, i.e. if it's law enforcement and you don't want to go into law enforcement, or if it's civilian work and you're only gearing your efforts towards law enforcement, and we'll talk more about private sector opportunities in other verticals. But nonetheless, just want to bring some things to the light because sometimes it's not heir apparent as to who's in the know, who should be in the know, regardless of where you are within the program, right? So in discussing some items the other day, just casually, right? I mentioned usajobs.gov. I also mentioned a particular agency that we'll hone in on now. But what I want to do is allow you to see, by way of what we'll do as a group, just through observation, some capabilities at your disposal to essentially enhance your knowledge of being in the know, okay? So this particular link I set up specifically for this position in this agency that we mentioned the other day, right? I wasn't having an outer body experience the other day, right? I did mention this, right? Okay, cool. And I had mentioned that one of your classmates in another class of mine, classmates being an undergraduate person like yourselves at this particular college, is just about through the full process for this particular position. But, and I want to go into all the parameters that they set forth and how to go about finding it and what have you. So first and foremost, this brings us to the main interface of this federal employment job database, right? So the best thing, without going through a lot of red tape right now, but also bringing it to your attention, what you have to do is sign up for a free account for usajobs.gov, right? So they have your data, they send you updates on this, what have you. Nonetheless, federal agencies use it as a portal, right, to funnel through applications from young people like yourselves between the ages primarily of, the majority of these are 21 minimum, 21 years old, maximum 37 years old, all right? Nonetheless, the age demographic. So I want to show you just, once again, I know your technological aptitude is probably just fine with things like this and all things searchable. But once again, honing in on different agencies and different locations for agencies. If we were to go here without even just setting up an account yet, just to peruse, right? And we entered, you can even enter an acronym, CBP for Customs Border Patrol. here's a couple other things I want you to key in on. Normally, I'd say enter your jurisdiction, right? Unless, it's a case where you 100% don't care, right? Where somebody, an agency, would place you if you were to be hired. A lot of cases you want to be specific. I'll show you that in a second. But with this, and this could be subjective, but a lot of times it's decent to do that, right? Because once you leave the location open, but do highlight an agency, then the best thing to do is go over to the right side and hit open to the public, right? Because some of these, if you saw just something different, this applies more so to veterans for that particular endeavor, because then what happens if you apply to that by mistake or just apply to it? Veterans are going to get preference right over you automatically, right? So you want to put yourself in the best possible situation. And then some are very specific, like here, like this wouldn't apply to you. First of all, it says supervisory, and it's specific to being a director of a port, right, where CBP officers are often assigned. Nonetheless, the best thing for undergrad, criminal justice, homeland security majors, right, like yourselves, to do is check off open to the public, and then you'll get an advertisement that would highlight a particular position that you qualify for, which you do. Now, I just want to bring to your attention what happens what you see and what to be familiar with when you do click on a certain position. And honestly, if you have any inquiries, even if it's not a position, right, like this one, maybe you have no interest in this at all yet, but maybe you have interest in federal employment or simply, right, the career endeavor process. Just ask, right? This is an open forum. So what do we have here? They tell you a starting salary and a starting pay grade, right? Government, federal employment jobs, you see different numbers as far as pay grade. 5 is the lowest and lowest paying, and 7 is the highest paying for the lowest bracket. That's where a lot of you would fall into, the 7. And it gives you the starting pay and talks about other job-related endeavors. Now, you see here, this is sometimes what you want, but just be aware of something. Well, first off, perhaps the most important thing, to keep yourselves in the know or in the game, right, is something like this. The open period, right? The open period is, for this particular position, is 11/1, so it's already been open 16 days, and will close at the end of the month. So federal employment will often block off a period of time that I'm not going to say is unforgiving, but it's purposely deliberate. Could you imagine how many people in 30 days across the country for a nationwide position? Mind you, they're hiring for multiple jurisdictions. I'll show you that. But could you imagine how many people are applying, right? So they only need to keep it open for 30 days. And then they just shut it down. Then they have what they call a pool, all right? Most importantly, once you click on the actual position, right? What do we have here? They give you a summary of the position, and obviously you would want to learn more specifically on their site. Shows here currently accepting positions, right? And then you see the full pay grade spectrum, right, of minimum to maximum, okay? And then it tells you, based on that scale, that officer, even in your first year, is eligible for up to $45,000 in overtime pay in addition to the starting salary, because let's not sugarcoat anything. That starting salary is rather unforgiving, right? $37,000. in this day and age, in 2023. It wasn't much different 30 years ago, that starting salary. So what's that tell you? It's a government job. They're not known to be the J.P. Morgans, right, of all things professions, if that makes sense. Tells you some other things over here. If you were to relocate or forced to relocate, relocation expenses reimbursed? Nope. Now, can you write some of that off on your taxes? Yes, right? It is a permanent position. So once you are fully trained, even though you have a probationary period of a minimum of a year, unless you're one of those special cases where, based on your work product, you know, it's up to them how long they deem you to be a probationary employee, but nonetheless, it's usually just a year. Okay, potential of up to GS 12, grade 12, where you might be starting at 5 or 7, grade 12. So always keep in mind, and you can always open source those federal grade salaries, okay? Drug test, yes, and I'll read off the parameters, all right? But on the right side, they give you quite a bit of information, all right? U.S. citizens may apply, jobs open to the public. Locations are determined by the needs of the agency. Always keep that in mind if you're interested in federal employment, right? And I want to show you a couple other things. So they'll break it down by duties. Sorry. All right. All job duties. You know, I'm not going to go into all this stuff, but this is what I definitely wanted to hone in on for you. You'll be asked to, now this is most federal positions. This could be, if you applied to another job that's currently open right now, U.S. Secret Service agent, amongst others, the majority, and including but not limited to this one and most. They will tell you, the agency, right? The agency will tell you to provide your preference as to one, right, for one of the following mission critical locations. What do you think that means? Provide your preference for one of the following mission critical locations. What do you think a mission critical location is? As it applies to this class, as it applies to the profession, the position. Seriously, anybody? Terry.
Probably where you're going to be stationed at.
Right, but that they're telling us something extra special there. Just keep in mind certain things like this, Brian.
When they're going to need employees in those areas?
They need a specialized amount, a particular amount of employees in those areas due to, right, significance factors, right? This is not Border Patrol, but unless you're, right, in Planet Zeptar, look at some of those locations. El Paso, Brownsville, Hidalgo, Laredo, right on the border of Texas. This location in Washington State, don't have a map in front of me, most likely bordering Canada, right? Areas of interest. Let's look at some others. Now, obviously Arizona, right? California, Washington, D.C., Miami, Detroit, Michigan, Montana, Minnesota, all in their individual ways, particularly have a level of significance as to why they are there and geolocated as such. Newark, New Jersey, Queens, and Alexandria Bay, New York. So you may have even heard me in I don't know what particular lecture, but Customs and Border Patrol, you could also find them down at Chelsea Piers in Manhattan, where the cruise ships go out of. Anytime I went on a Disney cruise with my family, Customs and Border Patrol would be there too. I saw a former student of mine down there working. I was like, this looks like a pretty good gig for you. He's like, yeah, it is. But that's not there right now. You don't see Manhattan or anything like that, but you do see Queens. So they do mention New York. And sorry, doesn't say Long Island, and usually will not. So just always keep these things in mind. I know you're not living under a rock, but with positions like this, flexibility could also be key. So you could be one of those people like I was 30-something years ago, or thought I was, and put down, yeah, I'll go anywhere. I'm not going to, like, I didn't necessarily put down locations that would represent, Otay Mesa, California, but I picked back then, they gave you like 3 choices. So I would say New Jersey, Newark, right there, New York, and if Connecticut or something else nearby, or Pennsylvania wasn't there, I'd be like, where would I go? Miami? I don't know. Nonetheless, they're giving you, based on what they're saying here, a preference for one. Now, say they want you as a candidate. Say you fit the bill and you get through the process. And you put down, what would you put down? What would you put, if you were applying for this job, would you put down Newark? Would you put down somewhere in New York? What would you put down? I'm asking you for a reason. Yeah, I'm looking right at you. Okay. And let's say you fit the bill, they were going to hire you. You checked off the boxes to fit their needs. They'd be like, we want you. And, if the guy who was, your recruiter or your background investigator, most likely your recruiter, would say, well, you're good to go. I got good news and bad news. You're cleared to be hired. But Newark is not in the running. Are you willing to go to El Paso? And the minute you say yes, good. Let's move you. Do her medical. Go. No? Okay, bye, thanks. Next. That's what it is. It's like a conveyor belt. You know what I'm saying? They do give you the heads up months in advance as to, how do I put this? Managing your expectations a bit, right? Where people that are multilingual will often benefit more so in different times. That's where I, at one point, fell short. Me hablo español un poquito. And back then, nada. Right? So if you are multilingual, they may even say, okay, yeah, because of that, we will keep you in Newark. But we'll put you where we have a stronger need in Nogales, Arizona, where the cartels are just, buying up the neighborhoods. It's like the movie Sicario sometimes. What I'm trying to say is it can be case by case based on the need and jurisdiction, right? That's how the feds tend to kind of operate, right? Hence, you may be offered a duty location in another geographic location within the United States, like I just kind of role-played with you, right? They give you more money if you're willing to, sorry, it's so small when I attempt to kind of, let me see here. There is a incentive benefit, duty locations offering 25% recruitment incentives, i.e. almost like that signing bonus, if you're willing to go to California, Montana, North Dakota, or Washington. Well, you can see why, at least in a few of those areas, right? Some of those areas aren't necessarily like super high on the majority of humans' wish list. You know what I mean? And then they're also offering a 15% recruitment incentive if you want to go to this other area of North Dakota. All right. Nonetheless, then this is what they're doing to also manage expectations, right? As soon as you get hired, you're going to go through a 2-week in-service type of academy, right? Then you're going down to Glencoe, Georgia, which has always been the primary federal training center for majority of agencies, at least for about 101 days, at FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, okay? And once you graduate from that, right, they state here you must serve a 1-year probationary period during the first year of your initial permanent federal employment, right? Once you clear that first year, then you're eligible for other things within the agency and the ability, right, to gain permanent status, as they indicated. And then if you saw fit, if that particular agency wasn't for you and you cleared your probationary period and then some other time, it makes it easier in some cases to transfer to another agency as far as federal employment, you know? But if you don't clear that year, you'd have to repeat an academy, you know, it's a lot, okay? Obviously, it's a firearm carrying position, it's a law enforcement position. They go over some residency requirements, other qualifiers, as it applies to you all, and we'll kind of start wrapping things up here with this. Experience, a minimum of 3 years full-time general work experience that demonstrates the ability to meet and deal with people and the ability to learn and be able to apply what you've learned, or, right, knowing that, like I talked about previously with you, in some cases, you're a full-time college student. You could articulate what you've been doing, right, within that status area, right, that you're encompassed in. Therefore, a bachelor's degree or successful completion of a full 4-year course of study in any field leading to a bachelor's degree from an accredited college or university, right? Or, here's another good thing, why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this to waste my time or yours. Just say you're not there yet, but you wanted to, you know, put yourself in the mix, right, for getting hired. You will receive a bachelor's degree from accredited college or university within 9 months of the closing date, which is November 30th, of this announcement, and will upload all official and unofficial transcripts before the closing date of this announcement, or a combination of education and experience, blah, 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 blah. So, let's say you're not graduating in May, right? May of 2024, and you're going, you know, whatever. You need the other semester, right? Fall 24, or maybe spring 25. You're articulating to them via your transcripts and your coursework, this is my situation, and it most likely will apply here if it does, okay? Then they tell you how you could qualify for the GS grade level, which is a bump up in pay, right? And technically, at least a year off of your total employment, right? And this is where you would where they base, like, you may not have the work experience, right, in the field, but you could qualify for the GS7 level if you have a bachelor's degree with their version of superior academic achievement, which is based on class standing GPA 3.0 or higher, or honor society membership, right? And they give you another link to investigate that and what goes into that, or 1 full year of grad education, et cetera, all right? Age requirement, it's 21, et cetera. Little more here. You don't want to skip these things. Additional information. Polygraph examination. This CBP officer position is a polygraph required position. You must take a polygraph exam and have favorable results in order to continue in the pre-employment process, and then they give you a link and most likely a video, right, for that, as well as videos and links regarding your background investigation, medical, what they're looking for, drug testing, physical fitness screening, the interview process, et cetera. So They leave no stone unturned as far as managing candidate, right, expectations. Questions? Anybody on this so far? Okay. There is one particular, if you're a veteran, certain veterans, depending on the case, may be eligible for a polygraph waiver. That may have to do with security clearances, things like that. All right. Then they tell you how you will be evaluated. What you need to do, and now we're wrapping up. If you were to ever apply for something like this, which hopefully, if that's your goal, you will do so in the near future, based on where you stand in the academic program. They break down essentially how they gauge if you're qualified. Your job is to leave no stone unturned for that. Because you've got to remember something. Not just with the feds, but with any hiring agency or organization that uses first a computer to evaluate you on paper, you need to ensure that your resume, as well as the document that you may have to fill out internally within usajobs.gov or whatever, or their particular application process, articulates in full, I'm a college student, I started this year, I'm currently here on my transcripts, I am due to graduate in this time frame, right? You would also write down any and all relevant experience as it applies to this position, if it did. Make sure dates are there, words are there, right? You don't want a technological system, right, to prohibit you from moving on in the process if you fail to leave something that they're requiring to see, right? Etc. So that's kind of important. And we'll talk more about that in the future. And look, here's how they also categorize applicants. Best qualified, very highly qualified, and they have their own interpretations. Highly qualified, well qualified, or qualified. You want to be, I would say, in the top, at least the top three, right? To have like a real strong shot. And based on our conversation the other day, it was mentioned that, I believe, they even waived the entrance exam. Yes? Forgot your first name, I'm sorry. Sorry. They waived the entrance exam. Was it for this position or something else? It was for the 1811 special investigator. All right. This one, I still think there is a written, but they also give you a study guide for that or some version of one, etc. So they also provide a link for that. And I'm pretty sure, and the way it used to be a couple of years ago, you used to take the exam, they let you know right away if you pass or fail, right? And then they schedule you for the polygraph. Now, there's a couple more stages before you get to that polygraph. Polygraph's probably second to last now, but nonetheless, all right? So they do their best to manage all expectations. Lastly, how to apply, required documents. They tell you everything. Resume, transcripts, if you're a vet, your DD-214, blah, blah, blah. Statement of service if you're active duty. Age requirements, if that doesn't apply to you, you're well within the frame. And if you were a former federal employee, an SF-50. Other things, if you're making other claims for transferring, etc. And then how to apply, they give you everything, okay? Just be very detail-oriented with everything that you do here within that E-Verify system and everything that you upload and everything that's documented on anything you upload, okay? So we'll try to, at least as we're closing out the last phase of our fall 23 course, once a week, we'll try to hit on at least in any agency, whether it's at the federal level and using this particular career portal, or a state agency, county agency, you know the deal, all right? And if you are aware, and once again, in cases like this, you're not just competing against each other, you're competing against people like you all across the country. But guess what? You have to be in the mix. You can't let that, right, deter you from applying if that is in fact something that you feel could be meeting a goal or objective for your career desires, etc. Any questions, comments today on that? Anything? All right. All right. So back to business as it applies to today. As I indicated the other day when we discussed Department of Homeland Security's capabilities and task-oriented endeavors when it comes to investigating counterfeit goods and pirated sources and whatnot, we're going to relegate it to that one-day lecture. So if you were not here, make sure you go into Module 9 and review that content. All that is in Module 9, okay? Today, we're going to talk about another specific compartmentalized area, whereas we have discussed it previously from a broad perspective, from a what if or where things could occur domestically or internationally and have historically. But this is right as to where we are in our time juncture in this semester. We're talking about the counterterrorism aspect, right, for mitigating risk as it applies to houses of worship. So what we're going to do, right, and that's very specific, right? What we're going to do for the next couple classes is talk all things from a counter, right, perspective, preventative, deterring, combating, within our control, right, managing risk as it applies to certain verticals. Today, we'll talk certain components, not all, but certain ones, as they apply to houses of worship. The next time we meet, pretty much this is like a three-prong type of endeavor, where we're going to look at houses of worship, counterterrorism for houses of worship, counterterrorism for transportation security, and counterterrorism for places that are no longer per se soft targets, but more hard targets. One session before the end of the semester will cover stadiums and arenas, places we go like that for large populated events, and other places where you could have larger populations, not as large, but where mass populations do meet, and where terrorists could, in fact, attack, places like malls, movie theaters, things like that, okay? All right, so we're going to start off with a quick video. It's a couple weeks dated, but it fits the bill. Stand by.
Protest tomorrow. It sparks some concerns of possible violence and has even left some scared to leave their homes.
Yeah, the NYPD says those fears are unfounded. James Ford interviewed the person in charge of intelligence at the police department and has more from the Upper East Side. James.
And specifically, we are in front of the Islamic Cultural Center. They say that as part of the NYPD's effort to ensure that houses of worship are kept safe. They've seen regular patrols of the NYPD. I can tell you I do not see one right at this moment, but definitely the administration here saying they feel safe, and the administration of the NYPD saying they see no credible threats at this point, but are being vigilant straight on through, and that what that vigilance means, well, we'll show you firsthand. In addition to being here, we went to the Central Synagogue in Midtown. That was earlier this afternoon, and when we were there, so were the people you see in this video. Officers from NYPD Counterterrorism, along with security guards from the landmarked Jewish House of Worship. This type of presence, that's what the NYPD's Deputy Commissioner, who oversees thousands of officers like these, as well as all of the intelligence operations of the department, says you can expect to see all of this in response to comments like these made by Khaled Mashal, the former leader of Hamas, regarding tomorrow. He said, quote, "Deliver a message through the squares and the streets, a message of anger that we are with Palestine," end quote. Some people are concerned that that could mean danger for non-Muslims, especially Jewish people. The Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence counters that with this.
These calls to action that are being issued, people might interpret them in different ways, and that's where our intelligence resources are really important. They should go about their daily business as they would any other day, and they'll see a lot of police officers around, and that should be reassuring. Yeah, stay vigilant and stay calm. That is the message.
Now, the Hamas leader's message also included the word jihad, which in classical Arabic means struggle. What does that mean for the protests that are scheduled for tomorrow, and what it should mean for you? We talked with the imam here at the Islamic Cultural Center, one of the leaders of the Muslim community in our region. We'll hear more from him regarding jihad and regarding these protests and more of what you should expect as they happen tomorrow. That's all on the Pix 11 News at 5 o'clock. Right now, reporting live from outside the Islamic Cultural Center, I'm James Ford, Pix 11 News.
Meanwhile, across the city, the NYPD is preparing for a pump.
Okay. So, although a couple weeks, several weeks dated there, if you recall, based on what they're referring to, based on international matters, because we know, despite where one major conflict could be occurring somewhere across the world, we know that doesn't matter. We know that whether it's here or somewhere else outside the United States, there's always a trigger effect when it comes to terror-based force multipliers and variables on as to where other jurisdictions could be implicated via threats and what have you. Hence, one of the largest major cities in the world with populations, that are applicable to where the international conflict occurs. Without sugarcoating anything, it also, I use this particular segment because, number one, it stressed the hyper-focus and a defense by way of NYPD procuring efforts to increase efforts, specifically to houses of worship. And based on the big three of what is commonly referred to as houses of worship, they named at least two of the big three, that being a mosque, number one, and a synagogue, number two, Just so happens, as it applies to those particular houses of worship, unfortunately, the international conflict itself, which is historical in nature from centuries ago, as we know, does exist within the confines of those populations, one being attributable to a house of worship that's a synagogue, and the other a mosque, hence the mention of it. Number two, but most importantly, right? And I don't care who in particular was saying it, right? But without sugarcoating anything, one member, obviously radicalized member of one of the populations, used verbiage that, although very casual in nature, especially when you heard commentary from the Deputy Commissioner of Counterterrorism, right? Make no mistake, right? The United States, post 9/11, research and data indicates certain levels of threats across the country at different times, depending on who the security threat group is. Obviously, that's a hotbed for all things drawing from an international conflict. Simultaneously, remember something. Yes, we're focusing on houses of worship, right? And I may be going to church Sunday morning, not necessarily in New York City, but I'll go to my house of worship. You may go to your house of worship. And it really doesn't matter what religion we are. If there's a threat against one of them, could the threat also impact anybody else that's not the same religion, that's just walking by or in the vicinity, right, of the house of worship, right? You may have a completely different religion than I, but if you're in the same area as me that's being targeted, vice versa, who does it affect? Just the person inside the house of worship? Of course not, right? Impacts everybody. There's no indemnification of who's going to be affected here. And do they care? Do you think, regardless of who's presenting the current threat, but relevant to who possesses or who's initiating a threat at any given time, do you think that shot caller, that person in charge, 100% cares if sometimes his own people are part of the victim number at any particular terror? Of course not. No. They'd be in the wrong business if they did, okay? Okay, so let's get down to some important stuff as it applies to today's lecture. I have it relegated to all things house of worship, but specifically, we're going to be talking about something called targeted violence, which is always an indicator or force multiplier that accompanies not only a terror event, but even more so when international conflict is going on. This is when houses of worship, right? It makes it a little more compartmentalized, hence a targeted population as well. Let me make sure this is also visible, which it's not. All right. So we'll be going over a few things today in the next 25 to 30 minutes, talking about targeted violence and some of those parameters, some relevant statistics that are very helpful to be aware of as it applies to terrorism and counterterrorism specific to houses of worship. And we will start what's called a framework for planning from a security standpoint by way of what is a vulnerability assessment. What we do not finish in that area, I'm currently not concerned with, because when I mentioned that we'll be going into different areas of subject matter topics from a counterterrorism perspective, today with the houses of worship, right, transportation security, bridges, tunnels, things like that, and the propensity for threats against it. As well as what else? Like other places that are hard targets, arenas, stadiums, whatever it is. Vulnerability assessments aren't just relegated, right, to a house of worship. So we'll be talking all things security, and vulnerability assessment based on risk factors, okay, for each individual one. So I'll start that, and if I don't finish, which I probably won't, all things that would be considered a vulnerability assessment, we'll definitely be able to make up that criteria, all right? So, as it applies to what they call the Department of Homeland Security Strategic Framework, and this is open and available for you, all right? I'm just going to kind of like hone in on certain areas. First and foremost, when it comes to a house of worship, which is particular, right? Or a particular population, for instance, because why else would they be targeting a certain house of worship if they weren't targeting a certain, sample population, right? Or a particular individual, right, that subscribes, if you will, to a certain religion. Hence, laying out the groundwork for what's considered, and what we're doing first, defining targeted violence, all right? Targeted violence, as per Department of Homeland Security, is any incident of violence that implicates Homeland Security and or a DHS activity, and in which known or knowable attackers select a particular target prior to the violent attack. Now, another reason I want to hone in on that, if we go back months ago, when we were talking about, probably in our first phase, if you will, of this course. Remember terror typologies, and we had 5 terror typologies, right? And I'm not talking about assassinations and those. I'm talking about the actual categories of terrorism. Anybody recall? Right? Remember tactical, right? A couple other ones. Like the targeted violence as it applies to houses of worship essentially is compartmentalized, if you think about it, into at least a minimum, I would say, of 2 of those categories of terrorism. I'm only mentioning that is because I feel if you recall that content, which it was very clear, everybody tested fine out of that, and even though it's pretty dated now for us. If you could just kind of rehash that, combine that with the thought process of, okay, perpetrator group A is targeting victim group B, and they subscribe, right? Now, the other thing is, where sometimes those categories overlapped, what is the distinct force multiplier? This is important for a final exam question, because you'll include this content in it, because it is one of the drivers behind historical terrorism. What is the main force multiplier within the confines of all things attacking a house of worship or defending a house of worship? Yes, Homeland Security, this, that, and the other thing. But what's that long-standing force multiplier that has been around for centuries and drives and even makes up part of the definition of radicalization and or part of the definition of terrorism? It's based on a threat of some kind, but we're threatening something. It's not just people, places, and things. This is more of a concept, and most people adhere to it. I'm being vague for a reason, but I'm trying to get you there. Anyone? We practice it. That's my last hint. That should be a dead giveaway. Come on. We practice it. I'll say basketball. Well, not everybody practices it. Here's my last hint, because I'm a nice... Oh, what were you going to say? Yeah, religion. Hello. What's a house of worship, right? What is terrorism based on? Radical ideologies driven from religious and political views. It's one of the strongest, right? It moves mountains. Moves mountains, right? You could call my mother anything you want. Don't touch her. Don't come near her. You could call her anything you want. I'm 49. I don't have that time to worry about what you're calling me and calling my mom and this and that, but guess what? You will not impede on my religion. You will not tell me who to worship or what to practice, right? Why? Because I'm Mr. Patriot and I'm Mr. Constitution? No, nobody should have that right impeded upon. But what is often threatened the most? The things that we hold closest to us, right? Okay. Unlike terrorism, but a strong overlap, targeted violence includes attacks otherwise lacking, gotta be careful with some of this, lacking a clearly discernible political, ideological, or religious motivation, but that are of such severity and magnitude as to suggest an intent to inflict a degree of mass injury, destruction, or death commensurate with known terrorist tactics. Sounds rather contradictory. However, when you apply, right, and I don't care if I had the head of the Pentagon here, when you apply targeted violence to a house of worship, we got to take the unlike terrorism out of there and make it alike to terrorism, right? Make sense? Okay. Once again, nothing new. Targeted violence refers to violence that is goal-directed and focused on specific individuals, groups, or locations. Well, we know where the primary locations are right now, and it ain't in the United States, it's overseas. You know what I'm referring to, right? You know what's going on in the world. That's just one major example in the current, right? We know the players, we know the groups, right? We know the locations. Perpetrators select their targets to achieve specific motives, such as the resolution of a grievance or to make a political or ideological statement. So this source can play all the games they want, because, and once again, I'll take ownership of that. I selected the source, and the source is a federal website. But when we're talking ideological, we're talking religion. We're just talking the radical end of it, right? And this isn't about your politics or mine. We're talking about public safety and the ability to recognize a threat. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many different religions are in this room, across the country, across the world. The threats of violence by way of large scale, right, or even small scale, building up to the larger attributable violence that essentially is the primary goal, there's no boundaries, right? That's the other thing, there's no boundaries. Here's the other thing that will support what I was attempting to convey before, based on what we learned previously months ago. Targeted violence is distinct from violence that is impulsive, random, or spontaneous. Remember we had random terror? Remember random terror? Right? We're going to blow that coffee shop up over in this section of the world just because we can, to like let it be known, hey, we're here. Or it's not so random though, right, if we know who's inside. So things change, right? And they change here too. But targeted violence is often distinguished by clear indicators or pre-attack planning behaviors. Well, based on what the leader of Hamas was saying before, as per that news segment, that's a pretty clear indicator. Where was he saying? Did he say New York City? No, he said anywhere. Now, they're way over there, over thousands of miles away. But religion spreads worldwide, right? Hence, it's also the method of the communication and the modality, if you will, the style in which that communication would be attributable to this. Right now, just removing any research that is relegated to a certain decade in which they were identifying, we'll just conclude this particular section with some additional significant factors. Once again, when we're defining an act of targeted violence against specifically now a house of worship, as any incident in which a perpetrator does what? Deliberately targets a house of worship to do one or more of the following. Kill or injure one or more persons affiliated with a house of worship, including who? Clergy, staff, and congregants. Everybody and anybody affiliated with it, inside of it, working there, running it, or visiting. Number 2, cause significant property damage to a house of worship. That speaks loudly as well. Because what does that do? It magnifies the situation. They could run inside if a threat's against one particular house of worship and shoot everybody inside. That may not fit the bill for many a perpetrator. They may want it ceiling to ground destroyed, right? Because what are we talking about? Mass casualties, the largest possible chaotic result that they could probably desire. Number 3, and or engage in, right, because it's contemporary times now, cybercrimes targeting a house of worship, including such acts as network intrusion, software piracy, identity theft, financial fraud, and phishing. Why not? Now, here's the thing where it separates itself, right, from what they're saying it wouldn't include as it applies to other type of targeted violence or crimes. They're saying this concept that we're talking about today includes 1, 2, and 3, right, specifically to a house of worship, but does not include situations such as this. Incidents where a perpetrator could not be identified or focused interest in the house of worship could not be determined. What does that mean? Well, they're not looking to sugarcoat things. If there's a house of worship, right, across the street from Madison Square Garden, or like on the next side street, which there is, right by the parking deck there, if you know that area, right off of 5th, they could blow away, role-playing here, part of the garden, but they might be gunning for the house of worship next to it, and maybe something happened and they hit the garden. That doesn't fulfill the objective. There might be mass casualties, but what'd you do? Hey, you hit a place where there's sporting events. There's no religious context there, right? There's no religious context there. If that was the case, what'd they do? Try to go inside or ram it simultaneously with a bunch of trucks with bombs in them. Then you could do damage to the circular structure, right? God forbid, of a place like Madison Square Garden, or come from the air, or it's just something, right? Go inside and get past security. You get where I'm going. But the goal is, if it doesn't involve, right, a religious connotation or a specific structure that is deemed a house of worship, that targeted violence, as it applies to all things that would fall in those parameters, would not apply. They're very clear here. Incidents resulting in minor property damage. That doesn't fit the bill for them. They're talking total catastrophe, right? Pre and post 9/11, there are significant cases domestically and internationally, right, in which houses of worship were targeted and major damage was done, like all-out destruction. The mosque was no longer a mosque. It wasn't standing anymore. Churches, same thing. Temples, same thing. Okay? Any incident where minor assault, burglary, graffiti, this is street-level crime nonsense. Doesn't apply. Gang violence, drug violence, other incidents. No. Violence from the surrounding community that encroached onto house of worship property. Do they care if a drive-by occurs by some Mickey Mouse set of the Bloods and somebody dies on the steps of a church if they were targeting a church? No. Right? Doesn't apply. All right? All right, now I'm going to use a document in the last 10 minutes here to show you some very important areas as it applies to Number one, types of attacks and some other protocols by way of some figures and terminologies and whatever we can get to by way of the whole framework of security and securing houses of worship by way of vulnerability assessments. And once again, vulnerability assessments are going to be a common denominator for the next couple lectures anyway, so what I don't get to within those, we will. So I'm going to open up this, and rest assured, wink wink, when it comes time for that final review, this will be one of the documents at your disposal, not only right now, right, but probably where one of the short answer questions will be coming from. All right, it's the Mitigating Attacks on Houses of Worship Security Guide. Stand by, I just want to get to the definitive area. Okay. Okay, types of attacks. Oh man, I'm gonna have to download this. Stand by. Okay, types of attacks. Just let's key in on this for a second. All right, this figure over here on the right side, which I'll do my best to ensure some visibility here. All right, so check out this breakdown. This is targeted violence against houses of worship in certain time frames. Nonetheless, we'll use it as a tool for observation as it applies to the primary methods in which the majority of houses of worship are attacked and the propensity for them. 3% of houses of worship are relegated to what's considered, as we all know, an active shooter event. Now, I can recall, because I'm a lot older than you, decades prior to, say, this one, in the last 10 years, a lot more active shooter events may have been applicable to domestic house of worship events, churches, temples, and mosques, mainly applying to churches, because here they're saying in the last 10 years, or actually a 10-year period that they're indicating, only 3% of house of worship attacks were confined to active shooter. You get that? Very small percentage, right? But I have no problem sharing with you because I tick a certain way and that's just how I am. When I'm personally in church, nowadays, I sit certain areas when my wife will complain and I'll be like, that's okay, you can run your mouth, and hopefully, God forbid, you won't have to thank me later if, right? We don't want to experience that, but there's a reason, right? You do certain things. Because I still believe there's a propensity, as you should, as anybody should, for somebody not of reasonable mind, just anybody, that could walk into a church. That's another thing about houses of worship, let me not forget. What do we know about their doors?
Always open.
Yeah. Say it again.
Always open. Anyone can walk in.
Yeah. And in post 9/11 times, they're just starting to lock doors more. My own brother's a Catholic priest. I think I told you that at least once. I don't know if you remember. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten into him about locking doors of a church, especially, we know when masses are during the week. During the week, they're early in the morning, all the old people go, and then the majority of people go, even to other services in other denominations, right, other house of worship on the weekend. Right? But that propensity, right, to penetrate the infrastructure is always there, especially if common knowledge is, like Terry blurted out, not good. So this 3%, do we want to put it? Do we want to rely on percentages? No. All right. Arson and bombings often used at a 35% ratio. Nowadays, cyber attacks might be the first, right? Because remember, things come in waves too. Cyber attack, 10%. Stabbings, 5%. Vehicle rammings. Now, a lot of these, right? A lot of these could be outside the United States. Some of the methodologies and styles you don't see in domestic situations that current, but you see them. Especially, you might see more of a vehicle ramming, like that maniacal person you see on video when people are more coming out in larger amounts, things like that. All right, just bear with me for a few more minutes. Breaks it down by state and region where things may occur the most based on certain 10-year periods. We don't have a lot of time to do that much of an evaluation, but as you see, different sections of the country, right? You see, it's almost like pick your poison. Sometimes you see more gun events. I got no problem saying it. Sometimes you do see more gun incidents in states where maybe laws are a little looser, gun laws, but it's not about gun laws all the time, right? People want a gun, they're going to get their hands on a gun. Right? For all those people out there, that have such a stand on certain things, regardless of the weapon, if the person wants it and the threat is significant, they're probably going to do what it takes to get it, right? Okay, we'll just give me 1 second. A lot of times, right, when identifying perpetrators, there's something called pre-attack planning behavior. Wouldn't it be nice it's one thing to be trained in the study of human behavior. And I'd like to think we're New Yorkers, we're probably better than most, hopefully, right, in studying people, places, and things, and analyzing behaviors. But remember, from a worldwide perspective, people in general are often glib, and I have no problem saying this, to what would be considered the ability to identify pre-planning behavior, right, before the attack or a threat comes, right, or the willingness to do so. Not only identify it, but do something about it, right? What they're saying here is, in a 10-year period, that some of the behaviors that you're probably also familiar with based on this course and other areas, from a perpetrator perspective, 6% of the perpetrators, as it applies to house of worship targeted violence, sent some type of threatening message, right, to someone or something affiliated with a house of worship. You get it? Like, what could it be? The old school type of picking up a phone, leaving a stupid voicemail, right, on the business line. And then what happens sometimes? The secretary gets it, and be like, delete. You want to delete it in 2023? Report it, just in case. The perpetrator told somebody who had nothing to do with that, and that person either reported it or reported it after the fact. Oh, yeah, they were saying something about, like, loading up a U-Haul truck with a bomb and driving it into the front door of the temple, but I didn't buy it. Okay. Big one. Internet activity. 1/3 of house of worship targeted violence indicated some communication on the internet that a threat might be relative. Action-wise, purchasing of arson materials and bomb-making materials, and 40%, just shy of 40%, no behavior reported. Well, that guy before, during that news segment, right, that one leader of that one group who they were talking about that wanted from a worldwide perspective, if you're of this group, because he was talking about his people across the world, then tomorrow go out there and do this, do that. Well, that's actionable intel. That was deliberate. Sometimes there is no deliberate communication, as you can imagine. All right? Okay. We're going to stop there for today. We'll either, when we come back Tuesday, pick up right here or move on to the next vertical. All right? Have a great weekend. Be well. Remember, be here Tuesday because next Thursday's Thanksgiving, right? Be well.